This story tells us about Clara, a teacher who wanted to do a good deed, but ended up in deep trouble, and the way everything turned out will surprise you. Clara had always been the kind of person who believed that helping others was more than just a moral duty. It was a way of life. From the moment she became a teacher at her local middle school, she dedicated herself to her students not just as a teacher, but as a mentor, a confidant, someone they could rely on. She spent long evenings preparing lessons, weekends correcting papers, and often stayed after school to help struggling students with their homework. Her life was simple, structured, and defined by service. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, Clara's routine was interrupted. A student, Alex, approached her with an anxious expression. There was something different in the way he moved, a tension in his shoulders, a nervous glance that avoided eye contact. "Miss Clara," he whispered, almost as if afraid someone else might hear. Could you hold on to this bag for me, just for a day or two? Please." Clara paused. Normally, she would have refused. School rules were strict. Never take possessions from students, never store items that weren't yours. But something in Alex's demeanor made her hesitate. There was genuine fear in his eyes, a desperation she couldn't ignore. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked gently, though she knew she might be prying. Alex shook his head slightly, muttering something about his father. Clara, sensing a child in trouble, felt compelled to help. "All right," she said, smiling to reassure him. "Leave it here. I'll keep it safe, okay?" It seemed like such a small favor. She placed the bag carefully in her classroom's storage closet, assuming it contained something harmless, school projects, maybe personal belongings he didn't want to lose. Clara trusted Alex. He had been her student for over a year, always polite, rarely causing trouble. Her decision felt instinctive, natural, aligned with everything she believed about helping others. That night, Clara went home thinking nothing more of it. She made dinner, graded a few papers, and felt a quiet satisfaction in having helped someone in need. She didn't know that this small act of kindness would soon spiral into a nightmare. The next morning, Clara arrived at school to find it unusually quiet. Before she could enter her classroom, a group of police officers was waiting at the door. One stepped forward, a tall man with a serious expression. "Clara Thompson?" he asked. "We need to talk about the bag you've been holding." She froze, the blood draining from her face. I don't understand," she stammered. "It's just a student's bag. I don't know what's inside." But the officers weren't interested in explanations. They claimed she must have known about the contents. The bag, they said, contained stolen money from a recent, high-profile robbery. Alex's uncle, or someone he lived with, had orchestrated a theft, and somehow the bag had ended up in Clara's classroom. Her good intentions didn't matter. Legally, she was now implicated. The disbelief, the shock, and the fear hit her all at once. She felt her world tilt. Her classroom, once a sanctuary of learning, now felt like a stage for accusation. Her students watched in confusion as their beloved teacher was questioned. Could they believe she had done something wrong? Could Clara even believe it herself? She tried to plead her case, explain that she had no idea, that she had trusted a child in need, but every word seemed to bounce off cold, unyielding walls of authority. In that moment, Clara realized something terrifying. Sometimes even the purest intentions can be twisted by circumstances beyond your control. A simple act of helping someone, something she had done countless times in her life, had become the very thing that could destroy her. And as she was escorted to the police car, she felt the first deep pangs of fear. Not for herself, but for the life she might never get back. Clara could hardly believe what was happening. Just yesterday, she had been teaching fractions and preparing a science experiment for her students. Today, she was sitting in a small, cold interrogation room, the walls gray and unforgiving, as officers questioned her about money she had never touched. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, harsh shadows that seemed to stretch across the room, mocking her. She replayed the events of the previous day in her mind, trying desperately to find any misstep she might have made. Had she done something wrong? Could she have somehow known about the contents of the bag? But the truth was simple. She had only wanted to help. She had never considered the possibility that her kindness could be used against her. The lead officer, a man with a stern face and cold eyes, leaned across the table. "Ms. Thompson, do you understand the gravity of the situation? This bag contained stolen funds from a robbery committed last week. You were in possession of these funds, which makes you an accomplice. How do you plead?" Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about it. I was just trying to help a student, that's all. Please, you have to believe me." The officer's expression didn't change. "That's not for us to decide. We will investigate. For now, you're under arrest." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Arrested. She felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her mind raced, a storm of panic, disbelief, and fear. Arrested? She, Clara Thompson, a teacher, a mentor, someone who had dedicated her life to helping others, now accused of a crime she didn't commit. As she was led out of the school, the students watched silently from the windows, their faces pale and confused. Whispers ran through the halls. Some wondered if it was true, others couldn't comprehend it. Clara felt the weight of their stares, the silent accusation, even though she knew they trusted her. The thought of them watching, wondering what had happened, made her heart ache. In the police car, Clara's mind replayed every interaction she had had with Alex over the past year. His polite smiles, his shy questions, the times he had confided in her about personal troubles. And now this. Had she missed some warning sign? Was there something in his eyes she hadn't understood? She felt a crushing sense of guilt, even though she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. At the station, the procedures were swift and impersonal. Fingerprints, photographs, forms she could barely read through the shaking of her hands. Officers spoke in clipped, professional tones, each word a reminder of the reality she could no longer escape. Clara's stomach churned. The world she had known, her classroom, her students, her routine, had been replaced by metal bars, harsh lights, and cold authority. As the hours dragged on, Clara's thoughts became a jumble. She worried about her family, her reputation, and the students who relied on her. Could she explain this to them? Could anyone understand that she had only tried to help? The fear gnawed at her. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing everything she had worked for, the fear of being trapped in a system that seemed to care little about truth or intent. Later, as she was escorted to a holding cell, the reality settled in. She was no longer Clara the teacher, Clara the helper, Clara the trusted adult. She was Clara the accused, Clara the suspect, Clara the prisoner. The bars of the cell were cold against her fingertips as she touched them, a stark contrast to the warmth of the classroom she had left behind. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination remained. She would find a way to prove her innocence. She had to. The first night in the cell was long and lonely. The noises of the prison, distant shouts, clanging metal doors, the murmurs of other inmates pressed against her like waves. Sleep came in fitful bursts, each one haunted by visions of Alex's anxious eyes and the bag that had caused all of this. Clara realized that life had changed irrevocably, and that her journey to reclaim it would be anything but simple. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale fear. Clara sat at the defense table, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge. She had spent countless hours thinking about what her life had become, yet nothing could have prepared her for this. Strangers in suits discussing her fate as if she were an object, not a person. Her lawyer, Mr. Ellsworth, leaned close. "Clara, stay calm. Stick to the facts. We'll prove you had no idea about the bag's contents. Just answer truthfully." Clara nodded, but her heart raced. How could she convey the truth? In a place where every word could be twisted, every gesture observed, every glance recorded. She glanced at the gallery. Parents, students, neighbors, even strangers had come to watch. Some faces were sympathetic, others filled with judgment. She could feel their eyes on her like invisible chains. The prosecutor's opening statement was sharp, precise, and merciless. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. Ms. Thompson knowingly assisted in the concealment of stolen funds. She may claim ignorance, but the law does not excuse negligence. Justice demands accountability." Clara's stomach churned. Every word felt like a hammer against her chest. She wanted to speak, to shout, to make everyone understand that she had only acted out of kindness. But she stayed silent, listening to words that seemed to slice through her reality. When it was her turn to testify, Clara took a deep breath and stepped up. The room seemed to shrink around her, every eye fixated, every camera lens recording. She tried to focus on the truth, the simple fact that she had done nothing wrong. I helped Alex because I thought he was in trouble. I never saw the money. I didn't know what was in the bag. I was only trying to help." The prosecutor's gaze was sharp. "Did you check the bag? Did you ask what was inside?" I trusted him. I didn't think to check. He seemed like a scared kid and I just wanted to help." Murmurs echoed through the room. The judge's gavel banged, demanding silence. Clara's voice shook, but she pressed on. "I am a teacher. I've dedicated my life to helping others. I would never willingly break the law." Her lawyer added, "Your Honor, my client is a victim of circumstance. She acted in good faith, with no intent to commit a crime. The evidence will show her innocence." The prosecution countered with testimony from Alex, though he tried to protect her, and forensic evidence tying the bag to the crime scene. Clara's heart sank. Each piece of evidence seemed to twist the truth, making her appear guilty. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, and she was defenseless. During recess, Clara sat in the hall, the weight of the world pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed quietly in her bag, a message from her sister. "Stay strong. We know you're innocent. Don't give up." Clara clutched it like a lifeline. She realized that even in the darkest moments, a thread of hope could hold her together. The next days were a blur of witnesses, cross-examinations, and whispered strategies. Every morning, Clara felt the same sinking feeling in her stomach. She worried about her students, who she feared would lose faith in her. She worried about her reputation, the media coverage, the way her life had been turned upside down. And yet, amidst the fear, there was determination. She would prove the truth. She had no choice. By the final day of the trial, Clara's voice was hoarse, her nerves frayed, but her resolve unbroken. She realized that the courtroom was not just about proving innocence. It was about reclaiming her identity. She was no longer just a teacher accused of a crime. She was Clara Thompson, a person who had been tested, who had faced fear and uncertainty, and who would fight to see the light of justice. As the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, Clara felt time stretch, each second echoing like a drumbeat of fate. She didn't know how it would end, freedom or prison, exoneration or punishment. But she knew one thing. She had faced the storm, and she had not backed down. The final chapter was about to unfold, and its outcome would change everything. The courtroom had emptied after a tense morning, but Clara couldn't leave. She lingered in the shadowed hallways, her mind replaying the testimony over and over. Every word felt heavier than the last. And then, just as she was about to step outside, her lawyer, Mr. Ellsworth, grabbed her arm. "Clara," he whispered urgently, "there's something new, something that might change everything." Her heart leapt and sank at the same time. "What do you mean?" He pulled her into a quiet office near the courthouse. "We just received an anonymous tip. Someone who knows Alex personally says the money in the bag wasn't from the robbery everyone thinks. It was a setup. Someone wanted to frame you all along." Clara's eyes widened. "A setup? Who would do that?" "That's what we need to find out," Mr. Ellsworth said, flipping through the documents. "But this changes the game. If we can prove the bag's origins were manipulated, we can show your innocence beyond doubt. And there might be someone orchestrating this to get Alex. And you, indirectly." Clara felt a surge of hope. It was fragile, almost terrifyingly so, but it was there. For the first time in weeks, she could imagine a way out. A real way out. That evening, Clara sat alone in her apartment, staring at the bag from that fateful day. She traced her fingers over its worn edges, imagining the fear Alex must have felt, the desperation that had driven him to lie. She realized how blind trust could be exploited, how her simple act of kindness had been turned against her. The next morning, new evidence arrived. A series of emails from an anonymous sender showing that the bag had been switched at the last moment. Clara read through them in disbelief. Someone had intentionally placed the stolen money into Alex's backpack after she had agreed to help him. It was meticulous, calculated, and it proved she hadn't knowingly committed a crime. Mr. Ellsworth approached the judge with the new evidence. "Your Honor, this changes everything. My client is the victim of manipulation. We request a review of the charges in light of this information." The prosecutor, initially dismissive, now frowned as he read through the documents. Murmurs filled the courtroom. For the first, time, the balance seemed to tip in Clara's favor. But just as relief began to creep in, Clara's phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. "Not everything is as it seems. Stop digging or the next mistake will be yours." Her stomach churned. Someone was watching. Someone didn't want her to uncover the truth. And suddenly the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just about proving innocence anymore, it was about survival, about navigating a web of lies and threats that seemed to surround her from all sides. Clara looked at the bag again, then at the courthouse looming outside her window. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, armed with new evidence, she had a fighting chance. And deep down she knew she would take it, no matter the cost. The day after receiving the threatening text, Clara felt a chill she couldn't shake. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside her window made her heart race. She had always considered herself cautious, but now the world seemed to have turned against her. Someone was orchestrating events from the shadows, and she didn't know who to trust. Mr. Ellsworth insisted she stay close to the courthouse that day. "We can't let them scare you into silence," he said firmly. "If someone's trying to intimidate you, it only proves how dangerous this case is." Clara nodded, but fear was a stubborn shadow at her heels. As she walked through the city streets, she noticed subtle signs. A car parked for too long at a corner. A figure glancing back from a cafe window. Each sight tightened the knot in her stomach. Someone was following her, watching her, waiting. By late afternoon, she received another message. "You're closer than you think. Keep digging and it'll cost you more than freedom." The words were precise, cold, almost mechanical. Whoever was behind this wanted to scare her. But Clara felt a strange mix of anger and determination. She wouldn't give up, not when the truth was within reach. At the courthouse, new witnesses came forward. One by one, they painted a picture of Alex's life that Clara had never seen. He had secret debts, secret meetings, and connections to people who had everything to gain from framing her. Slowly, a web of manipulation began to form in Clara's mind. She realized she had been a pawn, caught between someone else's schemes and her own desire to do good. That evening, Clara decided she couldn't rely solely on Mr. Ellsworth or the police. She started her own investigation. Every document she could access, every witness she could talk to, she pieced together meticulously. It was dangerous work. She knew someone could be watching every move. But she had to act. Her first break came unexpectedly. While reviewing security footage from the school, she spotted a shadowy figure switching the bags. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it confirmed her suspicion. Someone had deliberately planted the stolen money to implicate her. But as she studied the footage, she noticed something else. The figure was wearing a ring, a distinctive, unusual ring that she had seen before. She couldn't place it immediately, but her gut told her this clue was significant. Whoever this was, they were closer to her life than she realized. Late that night, Clara received a knock at her apartment door. Her pulse jumped. She peeked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Only a small envelope lay on the mat. She picked it up with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph, Alex smiling with the same distinctive ring on his finger. A cold realization washed over her. The person she had trusted most, the one she had tried to protect, was involved. Every act, every lie, every manipulation pointed back to someone she thought she knew. Clara sank into a chair, the photograph clutched tightly in her hands. Betrayal cut deeper than fear. She had tried to do the right thing, and yet she had been ensnared in a trap so intricate, so personal, that it shook the very foundation of her life. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. The shadows outside her window seemed to stretch closer, almost as if the city itself was conspiring against her. And Clara knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt. The real fight was only beginning. She wasn't just defending her innocence anymore. She was confronting a betrayal that threatened everything she held dear. And the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it would become. The days after discovering the photograph were the hardest Clara had ever faced. She couldn't sleep. Every shadow in her apartment seemed to move. Every ring on a stranger's hand made her jump. She tried to focus on school, on her students, but even their innocent chatter felt like whispers plotting against her. Alex's betrayal weighed on her like a stone in her chest, determined not to be. Caught off guard again, Clara began documenting everything meticulously. Every message, every suspicious glance, every unexplained occurrence was recorded. She started to see patterns in Alex's behavior. Small lies he had told, odd detours he had taken, inconsistencies in the stories he had shared about his life. Slowly, the carefully constructed mask of the friend she thought she knew began to crumble. One evening, as she reviewed footage from the school cameras, she saw it. Alex entering the building long after everyone had left, moving with a precision that suggested premeditation. He wasn't just involved, he was orchestrating it. Clara felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. She realized that every choice she had made, every attempt to help, had played into his hands. Her mind raced. How could someone she trusted so deeply be capable of this? And more importantly, what was his ultimate goal? Money? Revenge? Or something even more personal? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. Alex had underestimated her determination. That night, she decided to confront him, but carefully. Clara wasn't naive. She knew she couldn't face him alone. She reached out to a friend she trusted, someone outside the legal complications, and shared everything. Together, they devised a plan to get Alex to reveal his hand without putting Clara in immediate danger. The next day, Clara acted normal, maintaining her routine, but every step was calculated. She dropped hints about her discoveries, mentioned the photograph casually as if it were a trivial curiosity. Alex's reactions were subtle but telling. His eyes flickered, his voice caught at times, and his usual confidence wavered ever so slightly. By the third day, Clara had enough evidence to confront him directly. She invited him to a neutral location under the pretense of discussing the school project. When he arrived, smiling as always, she watched him carefully, noting every gesture, every twitch. The mask he wore, the one that had convinced everyone he was innocent, was slipping. "Alex," she began, holding the photograph in her hand, "I know everything." He froze. For a moment, the charming facade cracked. There was a flicker of panic, quickly replaced by calculated composure. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice steady but eyes darting. Clara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she laid out the evidence, the patterns, the surveillance, and the photograph. She watched as his expression shifted from surprise to irritation and finally to the faintest trace of fear. "You don't understand," he said finally, a defensive edge in his voice. "It's not what it looks like." Clara's pulse quickened. "Try me," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. And in that moment, the game changed. Alex realized that the quiet, obedient student he had manipulated was no longer playing by his rules. Clara had learned the hard way, but she had learned well. The confrontation was only the beginning. Whoever had believed she could be intimidated, silenced, or fooled again would soon discover that Clara was far more dangerous than they had imagined. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the battle unfolding in a small, dimly lit cafe. Inside, Clara and Alex faced each other, the weight of betrayal, fear, and determination pressing down on them both. One wrong move and everything could explode. The mask had slipped, but the war was far from over. Clara spent the night replaying the confrontation in her mind. Alex's reaction had confirmed her suspicions. He was hiding something far more sinister than she had imagined. The photograph, the unexplained behaviors, the detours, everything pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. But what was his ultimate goal? And why involve her? Determined to find out, Clara began digging deeper into Alex's past. She spoke to old classmates, neighbors, even acquaintances from his part-time jobs. Piece by piece, a darker picture emerged. Alex had a history of manipulation, of bending people to his will. There were rumors of minor thefts, cover-ups, and unexplained disappearances, but nothing concrete enough for the authorities to act on. Until now. Armed with this knowledge, Clara realized she needed more than courage. She needed a strategy. She couldn't simply expose Alex without risking herself. She reached out to Detective Harris, a seasoned officer who had quietly mentored her during the first stages of her investigation. Harris listened carefully, reviewing the evidence Clara had collected. Photographs, surveillance footage, and the inconsistencies in Alex's stories. "You've done a lot of heavy lifting here," Harris said gravely. "But this is bigger than a school project gone wrong. Alex isn't just reckless, he's dangerous. If you want to stop him, you have to think several steps ahead." Clara nodded. She realized this wasn't about guilt or punishment. Anymore, it was about survival, about stopping someone who had underestimated her from causing more harm. Over the next several days, they devised a plan. Clara would continue to act as if she was unaware, luring Alex into a situation where his motives would be exposed. Harris would be nearby, ready to intervene if things went south. The plan required patience and precision. Clara maintained her usual routine, teaching, helping students, but all the while she was observing Alex. Every interaction became a test, every word a potential clue. Slowly, patterns emerged, certain times when he disappeared, certain contacts he made, and most importantly, the way he tried to control her actions without appearing threatening. Finally, the opportunity came. Alex invited Clara to meet at an abandoned warehouse under the pretense of returning her notes from the school project. Clara agreed, careful to ensure Harris and his team were positioned strategically around the building. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Shadows stretched across the walls, and the faint hum of distant traffic echoed like a warning. Alex began speaking, weaving a story of necessity, of mistakes, of being forced into situations beyond his control. But Clara saw through it all. She had learned to read the cracks in his story, the subtle signs of deception, the hesitation in his voice. "You think you can fool me," Clara said quietly, her eyes locked on his. "You've underestimated me for the last time." Alex's mask slipped again, revealing the raw fear beneath his carefully constructed exterior. He tried to regain control, to manipulate her once more, but Clara stayed calm. She activated the plan, subtly signaling Harris, who entered with his team, surrounding Alex before he could react. In the chaos, Clara realized something profound. The person who had seemed so in control, the manipulator, the deceiver, was just as vulnerable as anyone else when confronted with the truth. Alex was no longer the puppet master. He was a man exposed, stripped of his illusions. Clara's heart raced as Harris handcuffed Alex. Relief washed over her, but so did a lingering sense of disbelief. How had things escalated so far? How close had she come to being trapped herself? She knew the aftermath would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks she felt a measure of control, of justice reclaimed. As they walked Alex out of the warehouse, Clara couldn't help but glance at him one last time. The man who had turned her life upside down was gone, replaced by someone smaller, broken, and utterly human. But a part of her knew that this was only the beginning of healing. For her, for the students, and for the trust that had been betrayed. The hidden truth had been revealed, and Clara had survived. Yet even as she stepped into the night, a sense of caution lingered. Life had taught her that danger often wears familiar faces, and the real challenge was learning to trust again, without losing herself. The night was quiet, but Clara's mind raced. Even though Alex was in custody, she felt no relief, not yet. Something in his eyes during the warehouse confrontation had unsettled her. A flicker of something she couldn't name, a warning she hadn't anticipated. Harris had assured her that Alex would face the full weight of the law, but Clara knew that people like him rarely left anything unresolved. Back at her apartment, she tried to sleep, but the events replayed relentlessly. Every detail of Alex's manipulation, every decision she had made, every risk she had taken, they all danced in her mind like a storm of what-ifs. Her students' faces, the innocent trust they had placed in her, pressed heavily on her conscience. Could she ever feel safe again? Could she ever trust someone so completely without fearing another betrayal? The next morning brought a fragile sense of normalcy. Clara returned to school, greeted by the cautious smiles of her students and the silent nods of colleagues who had followed the story from a distance. The news had spread, though details were scarce. Alex's arrest was public, but the complexities of the case, the hidden evidence, the narrow escape from disaster were known only to a few. Clara's phone rang unexpectedly during class. It was Harris. "Clara, there's something you need to see," he said, his voice unusually grave. She met him outside the precinct, curiosity and anxiety intertwining. Harris handed her a file thick with documents, photographs, and recorded messages. Clara's eyes widened as she realized the extent of what Alex had been hiding. Accomplices, coded messages, transactions spanning months. Someone else had orchestrated much of the chaos, using Alex as a pawn. "You think it's over," Harris said, But the real players are still out there. Alex is just the first domino. Clara felt a chill. The danger hadn't vanished, it had only shifted, moving silently, unseen. But she also felt a strange resolve, a determination forged in fire, tested in fear. She had survived manipulation, deception, and the terrifying closeness of betrayal. She had learned how to see through the illusions of control. Now she knew she had the tools to confront the larger truth. Over the next few weeks, Clara worked closely with Harris, piecing together the network Alex had been part of. They moved cautiously, knowing the risks, but also recognizing that inaction would mean more harm. Each discovery was a small victory. A hidden transaction blocked, a secret contact identified, a potential victim saved. Slowly the tide turned. Yet amid the victories, Clara couldn't shake the sense that she was being watched. Small signs, a shadow in a hallway, a phone that rang without caller ID, a feeling of eyes on her back, reminded her that danger had a long memory. And then, one evening, she received a letter. No return address, no signature, only a single line typed, in bold letters, "You haven't seen the last of me." Clara held the letter, heart pounding, mind racing. She realized that the story wasn't over, that danger and deception could resurface in the most unexpected ways. But for the first time, she felt ready. The lessons she had learned, the resilience, the courage, the vigilance, were hers to keep. As she folded the letter and placed it in her drawer, she smiled faintly. She had faced the darkness and survived. And now, she knew something important. The world might be unpredictable, full of hidden threats and unforeseen challenges, but she had discovered her own strength. The story of Clara's ordeal ended for now. But one question lingered, echoing like a shadow in her thoughts. Who would make the next move, and would she be ready when they did? The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with a final thought. Trust can be dangerous. Courage can be life-saving, and the truth is often more complex than it seems.